Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the wait. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I greet you with the greeting of peace. On behalf of the Islamic Society, I would like to warmly welcome you all to Discovery Week 2005, the grand launch, with some free food. Before we continue, it's in our tradition to recite a few verses from the holy book of the Muslims, the Quran. I'll pass you over to Umar al-Ghanim.
Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'll be reciting verse number 255 of chapter number 2 of the Holy Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Allah is He, besides whom there is no God, the ever-living, the self-subsisting, by whom all subsist. Slumber does not overtake Him, nor sleep. Whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth is His. Who is He that can intercede with Him but by His permission? He knows what is before them and what is behind them, and they cannot comprehend anything out of His knowledge except what He pleases. His knowledge extends over the heavens and the earth, and the preservation of them both tires Him not, and He is the Most High, the Great. صدق الله العظيم.
I'd like to thank you all for coming to the first event of the great launch, which is about to unfold in the beginning of Discovery Week. And truly this is the beginning of a discovery. A discovery, the awareness and education of one of the largest faiths in the world today. Unlimited by land, by nationality, or race. Discovery Week is like you could say a mini one week training course where there's no fee, you don't have to enroll, and there's no certificate at the end, of which the latter we could arrange for. Discovery Week, it's a form of providing some kind of religious education for those like ourselves that do not have access to at Imperial. And one of the aims of Discovery Week is that it may be for some who want to increase their understanding of Islam in their private study, or it might be a platform for those who want to clear up some misconceptions. Or it could be just for those who are curious. They might have some Muslim friends and would like to know more. But whatever it is, truly, Discovery Week is a learning experience. Not from books, but from Muslims themselves. And the agenda for today, I know you're waiting for, is that we'll begin with the grand launch topic, followed by a short question and answer session, and then to end with what a few call the big munch. But to start it all off, we want to begin with our all-important question. A question that determines how and why we live. And that is the existence of God. Fantasy or reality. If you please allow me to introduce our speaker. He was born to British parents in 1964. He embraced Islam in 1988, and he now works for the London Cultural Centre and the London Central Mosque. The Islamic Cultural Centre and the London Central Mosque. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the speaker to begin. And one piece of relation, not that important, but I think the other thing is most important, and that is his name is Abdur Raheem. It was on the poster, by the way, so I thought you might memorize that.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم Uncle Green sorry not distracted there إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا ما يهده الله فلا مضل له وما يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. We give by praising Allah, we praise Him, we seek His help, and we ask for His forgiveness, and we seek refuge with Allah from the evil of ourselves and from the evil consequence of our evil actions. Whomsoever Allah guides, there is none to misguide, and whomsoever Allah leaves to go astray, there is none to guide. And I testify that Allah alone is worthy of worship, and that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the final messenger of Allah. Brothers and sisters, friends, I don't think that today, if you are familiar with the arguments and the discussions, intellectual ones and spiritual ones and philosophical ones, about how could we know that there is a God, if you are familiar with those, there probably will not be anything really new for you here today. Perhaps except the way that I might construct or put those arguments together. But I have a very firm, unwavering conviction and belief that the reality of the existence of a creator of this universe is the most simple, reasonable and rational explanation for the existence of our universe and for the explanation for the meaning and the purpose of our existence. But since I can see from the topics that lie ahead, I don't want to stretch myself outside the realm of the topic that I have been asked to talk about. So I'm really going to restrict myself to the rational arguments through which and by which we could prove the existence of God, and then I'm going to give some other arguments by which we could prove the existence of God. And I use this prove, and I put my fingers like that to make inverted commas, because the first thing I would like to discuss with you is the concept of proof and evidence. Now, the books of philosophy that I have read discussing this issue and summarizing the various arguments that the philosophers have brought And it seems to be philosophers these days have come to a decision that we can't really prove that God exists. And that they're entitled, of course, to their opinion, which I don't really agree with. Having examined some of their counter-arguments and some of the reasons that they claim, what I have found generally is that they find it very easy to dismiss certain arguments, to put certain things forward in order to dismiss the very, very powerful and compelling evidence that is in front of us that this universe has been brought into existence by some great wise power, some being, some intelligence. And the arguments that go against that, from my opinion, are very weak. In fact, it's strange that from people who claim to be rational, their arguments are often emotional. And I think it's a good time to introduce one of these emotional arguments from the beginning. One of the atheist's favorite arguments is extremely emotional one. And it's been particularly brought to the highlight in the recent past with the tsunami. How could a God let such a thing like that happen? You have this tsunami, you have these disasters, you have these children dying, you have this pain, you have this suffering, you have AIDS, you have disease, you have war. How can there be a God? Actually, it's not a rational argument. It's not a rational argument. It's an emotional argument. The existence of these things say absolutely nothing about whether there's a God or not. That's the fact. The existence of these things has absolutely nothing to say about the issue of whether there is actually a creator of this universe or not. Why? Because the arguments that are always put forward about God's existence are based upon what we can observe of ourselves and our universe. The most compelling argument for me of all, and the other ones fail to sound convincing, is the argument of design. The argument that we live in a universe that is working according to laws, we find within it patterns, we find within it systems, and we find within the universe, the large universe, the cosmos, and also in the micro universe, the small things, we find incredibly intricate and complex mechanisms at work. We look at ourselves as human beings, our eyes, our brain, our lungs, our kidneys. We look at the world in which we live, the delicate nature of our planet, its distance from the sun, the alternation of the night and the day, the composition of the gases in the atmosphere. Each one of these things, if we examine them, are optimal for the existence of life. Oxygen is vital for our existence, essential for the existence of life. Yet too much oxygen can poison us. We find the perfect combination of gases: oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen. There is a gas that protects us from the harmful effects of the sun's radiation. We find our Earth alternates at a certain rate, 24 hours. Imagine actually if the Earth was rotating on its axis extremely slowly. Imagine that, for example, instead of a day being 24 hours, imagine a day was 5 or 6 or 7 years. What would be the effect of that? The effect would be one part of the Earth's surface would become superheated, the other would become supercooled. It would be inconceivable, difficult to imagine how life could exist under such conditions. If the Earth was much closer to the sun or much further from the sun, again, the conditions would not be right. And we find when we examine ourselves, when we look within ourselves, when we look at the human beings, when we look at the creatures around us, we find things existing. And they are really amazing in their intricacy and their complexity. The human brain, an absolutely remarkable instrument. I once heard someone describing the computing power of the human brain, and they compared it to the world's fastest supercomputer at the time. In terms of the processing power of the human brain, if the human brain was represented by something like this drawing board, so that's about what, a meter squared, if we took it like this, a meter squared, the world's fastest supercomputer, its computing power was the size of my thumbnail compared to the computing power of the human brain. These are the things that are very compelling. When we look at the laws which govern our universe, the stars, the galaxies, they are very compelling for human beings to believe that there must be some wisdom and some intelligence behind that. There is not one of us, who would take seriously for a moment the proposition that a simple desktop computer or a simple mobile phone, or for example this MP3 player that has now been put in my pocket, was a product of chance and coincidence. Although the main elements of this instrument are two things: plastic and silicon. Silicon being the chip that runs it. And what essentially plastic and silicon is what? Plastic and silicon, what's plastic from? Plastic is from oil. Silicon is, so name me a place where there's lots of oil and sand. Huh? The Middle East. So, I mean, yeah, that's good. You might get Iraq, Saudi Arabia, right? Something, whatever. So here I was walking along in the empty quarter in Saudi Arabia, and I found this lying on the ground, the product of chance and coincidence. Lots of oil, lots of sand. After thousands and millions and billions of years of the lightning flashing, the rain falling, the sand blowing, okay, this produced itself from a series of random events. I mean, all of us, no person would take such a thing seriously. We wouldn't. We just wouldn't take it seriously. And this is a relatively simple object compared to the human being. My point being, the argument is very compelling. It's rational. It makes sense. If we want to explain our existence, or the camel's existence, or the ant's existence, or the existence of everything in this universe, the simplest thing, a blade of grass, is extremely complex. The simple cell, the most simple living thing that we can think of, a cell, is fantastically complex. The information that needs to be contained within that, what we call simple, but it's not really simple at all. The information that it needs is astronomical. It is in fact inconceivable, immensely improbable and unlikely. And in fact, I believe it is really not something a rational mind can accept, that such a thing is a product of random events. Now, people would say, and we could give so many examples. We could be here all day giving more amazing examples. And I have so many in my mind, things that personally amaze me. One of them, for example, is the termites. How termites build their mound is absolutely incredible. How do these little creatures that have no brain, they have no computers, we can't even be sure how they could communicate with each other, yet they manage to build a structure that maintains itself constantly at a steady temperature of 30 degrees. They have an inbuilt air conditioning system. They grow their own fungus to feed themselves. The balance between the air coming in and they have a ventilation system. They have a series. They make from the earth rings down in the base of their tower. Down in the earth, they make these rings, and they make channels so the air comes up through these rings and through. How do they know to keep this whole huge structure at a constant temperature? How do they manage to produce such a feat of engineering? by random events, by, step by step, little bit by little bit. How? And since it's essential for their survival that this particular construction is maintained at that constant temperature, how did they survive before they were able to build such a thing? They don't have the capacity to gather that knowledge and that information. It suggests the logical, the rational conclusion would be that that information must have come from an external source. We look at our universe. We look at the universe in which we live. We don't ascribe to stars, to planets, to galaxies, the ability to organize. Yet they are amazing in the precision in which they are organized. Yet they don't have that ability to impose that upon themselves. How did it become organized? How did it reach this state? The universe does not have the capacity to organize itself. And we are not the creators of it. And did it come from nothing? Did this organization, this universe, come from nothing? Well, this is another question we have to ask ourselves. Where in the totality of human experience do we find something coming from nothing? Where? I mean, yes, a magician may pull a rabbit out of his sleeve and we all go, ooh. But we know it's a trick. He made us believe that he pulled something from nothing, but we know it's a trick. Because we know in reality, you don't get something coming from nothing. The more complex, the more organized, the greater the evidence of the intelligence and the wisdom behind that thing. That is why an archaeologist, can go into the desert. He can go into the desert, dig in the sand, and he can dig out one single piece of pottery. One piece of pottery. And he will tell us so many things about the civilization that made it. He knows about the materials they used. He'll be able to estimate the temperatures they needed in order to bake that clay, in order to get it to reach that consistency. And in order to do that, they must have been able to have this level of technology. And in order to fuel those ovens, they must have been able to access this type of fuel. And if there is writing and inscriptions on it and artwork, then he could tell us even more. He doesn't need to see the people making that thing. He doesn't even need to see the cities or the towns. He doesn't need to see that civilization. But for him, this piece of pottery is conclusive proof of the people who made it, of the wisdom and the intelligence behind it. This is the argument behind design. That this universe must have some wisdom and some intelligence behind it. Now, someone might object, well, that doesn't prove that there's a God. All that suggests is there's some wisdom, there's some, maybe it could be a consortium of gods. Maybe it could be a company like Sony, like you have all these things working together. Well, that's fine. But, the point is, at least we reach the understanding that it is inconceivable and unreasonable and irrational to suggest that this universe and that we are a product of some random event of chance and coincidence. Now, something I want to bring in here is some people say, yes, it's not probable, but they say it's possible. Some people say, we agree. Many people will agree it's not probable. Even Richard Dawkins, who calls himself a secular fundamentalist, I think he called one of his books Climbing Mount Improbability. I mean, he agrees that the proposition is improbable. But there's the agenda to push it forward that it is possible, it's conceivable. But, there's something that confuses me here. How many people actually live their daily lives with such a philosophy? It is, of course, possible that you could come to Imperial College and do absolutely no work. Go to no lectures, make no attempt to study, never open a book. In fact, it is possible that you could not even read or write. and you could go into the exam, make some scribbles on a paper, and get a first. Yes? It's possible. Yes? But is that how you live your life? Does anyone live their life like that? There are a few people who go and play the lottery, and they think they're going to get money like that, But I mean, in general, human beings do not live their life like that. They do not say, well, it's possible, remotely possible, therefore I'm going to pin all my hopes on that remote possibility. Be consistent. Be consistent, O atheist. Be consistent, O agnostic. If that's your attitude, have that attitude throughout all of your life. Why you only apply it when it comes to the existence of the universe and God? Because I'm sure, just like a student who spent their time at university, like how I described, at the end, he or she is going to have a very unpleasant surprise. Then surely, I will guarantee you, a person who has this attitude to this universe and to the being that has brought it into existence is going to have also an extremely unpleasant surprise. This is a really serious matter. By all accounts, if there is a God, this is not a joking matter. This is not a matter, it's not a casual matter. This is not a matter that we spend an evening thinking about it and, oh, that was a nice discussion. Because by all accounts, historically, from what people who believe in God and claim that this God has sent some revelation, by all accounts, they seem to agree that the consequences of failing to accept belief in this God and the consequences of failing to act in accordance to the dictates of this God are extremely severe. Therefore, everyone should take it seriously. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you take something seriously that's ridiculous. I mean, I don't really think people should take playing the lottery seriously. I mean, I don't play the lottery, and I think it's stupid to waste your money on it. Even if there is some remote possibility. But I don't think we're talking about a remote possibility. This is the point. The existence of God is not a remote possibility. It's an extremely logical and rational and sensible explanation for our existence and the existence of this universe. The atheist proposition is the improbable one. It's the unlikely one. The atheist is asking humanity to take a huge chance that this hugely improbable proposition might be the reality. So what the believers in God are asking is actually a sensible, rational proposition. Now, of course, I'm a Muslim, and I've chosen to be a Muslim, and I've chosen not to be a Christian, not to be a Hindu, not to be a Jew. I've chosen to be a Muslim. And like I said, I'm not going to go outside my framework today, and people are going to be covering in future lectures some of the reasons, I am sure, why we believe Islam is the truth. But my main focus today is on the issue of God. So I hope that we have at least touched upon the beginning of the idea of why the argument of there being some type of intelligence, some type of power behind this universe, behind ourselves, that has brought it into existence is compelling. But that's not really enough. I'd like to go a little bit further than that. And I'd like to introduce some compelling arguments as to why there is only one such being, one God. And something also about the nature of this being. The first thing that I'd like to introduce is the idea or the question of the nature, something about the nature of God. What things can we know about this being? Okay, there is a compelling argument for design. There is a compelling argument there is something behind the creation of this universe. But what? And I've touched upon it already. I've touched upon the idea that, well, the universe itself, within itself, does not contain the prerequisites for being its own creator. In other words, it didn't come from nothing, and it didn't create itself. the universe being a collection of stars and galaxies. Now, we don't attribute to the stars and galaxies the ability to organize and systemize and create, but individually. We know of no individual star or galaxy that has that ability. And if they don't have it individually, how would they have it collectively? There's nothing to compel us, and there's no reason to make us believe that the universe together as an entity has the ability to create and organize and sustain itself. It's not an attribute that we ascribe to this universe. Therefore, the universe is not God. The universe cannot be God. In fact, I can't really see any rational reason to believe such a thing. In fact, I observe the universe, I observe you, I observe me, I observe the things in the universe, and I see these things need someone or something in order to bring them into existence and sustain them. They don't have that property themselves. They need something outside of themselves. The universe needs something outside of itself. There is another compelling reason to believe that the nature of God must be different from the nature of the creation. And that is because if the nature of God is not different from the nature of the creation, we actually don't have an answer to our problem. Our problem being, what is our problem? Here we have an organized universe. Here we have things within this universe working according to patterns and laws, delicate mechanisms. How did it come to be like that? That's our problem. Where did this knowledge, this information, this guidance, this systemization, where did it come from? Now, if the nature of God is the same as the creation, then in fact God is just another created thing. God, therefore, would be in need of the same explanation. If the Creator is of the same nature as the creation, then we haven't found really an answer to our question. We can ask that question, the famous one, well, who created the Creator then? And therefore it's very compelling for us that the Creator must be different from the creation. The essence of the Creator must be different from the creation. And someone may say, by the way, why couldn't we have a creator creating a creator, creating a creator, creating a creator ad infinitum? And the reason for this, there is a type of logical reason why that might not be possible, and we'd just like to illustrate it with an example. If I wanted to lift this whole unit here, can't do it by myself. Okay, so I ask Shazad over here to help me. He says, sure, I will help you, but I've got a condition. I will only help you if he helps me. And he says, yeah, and I will only help you if you help me. And the other one says, well, I will only help if he helps. And if everyone makes a condition that I will not help unless someone else helps, not very difficult to imagine. It sounds like an Islamic society, right? You know, I will do it if he does it, in a sense. So we should be used to that type of thing. So what happens if everyone says that I will help only if someone else helps? And if everyone makes that condition, what's going to happen? Nothing. Exactly. Nothing will ever get done. The table will never get lifted. Because as long as you have someone saying, I will help if someone else helps, and if someone else helps, then I will help, and everyone makes that condition, nothing will ever get done. This is to understand the concept. If there is a creator creating a creator creating a creator, it's the same scenario as lifting the table. If there's always something behind something, then in fact what happens is nothing ever gets done. Nothing ever gets created. As the table is never lifted, the creation is never created, but here we are. The creation is here. That's a compelling reason to believe that there must be a first cause, a primary cause, something before whom there is nothing. And a being that is the first cause must be of a different essence, a different nature from the creation. So as the creation is temporary and finite and needy, those are attributes that we can convincingly and confidently give to the creation. It's temporary, it's finite, limited, and needy. it's confined by space and time. Therefore, it is not irrational. It is quite sensible. It's quite compelling to reason that the Creator must be infinite, self-sufficient, and not confined by space and time. So therefore now, we can confidently reason that there is an extremely wise, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, I use that word cautiously, being that is self-sufficient, eternal, and not confined by space and time, infinite. Now, I usually sort of stop there and say, because I also find it very hard to be able to imagine, and I'm not saying it's not possible, but again, it seems to be the most likely of all choices from a reasoning point of view, that there could only be one infinite, self-sufficient being. There are other reasons, compelling reasons, that we might think that there is only one such being, and that is also linked to, it goes back to the nature of the design of this universe. The nature of this universe, one of its characters is its symbiotic nature. The way that everything relies upon everything and everything interacts with everything else. There is a type of design within this universe that shows and illustrates a powerful single underlying force. This again compels us to the understanding that there should be one creator, one being that has brought this universe into existence. Now, I don't claim that that is a convincing proof, an absolute, unshakable argument that has nothing that someone can throw an objection against it. I don't mean that. But what I do believe is that this is a very, very compelling, very rational, very sensible belief. It's a very satisfying explanation for the existence of ourselves and for our universe. However, I think for some people it may be enough. For some people it may be enough. For others, they may need something else. They may need something more compelling. Or it still begs the question, well, even if there is this God, what's that got to do with us? For some people, and there are people who believe that. There are people who believe that there is such a God. But what is the connection between God and human beings, if there is any one? Why should God care about us? What are we? Just specks on an earth that's a speck in a universe that's a speck. But what is the universe? A speck before an infinite God. So why should God care about? These are all important questions. They're all good questions. But I'm going back to my point about the atheist, the argument of the atheist. This, therefore, shows and illustrates why the argument of the atheist about the tsunami and AIDS and disease has actually got nothing to do with the existence of God. It's got nothing to do with the issue of whether there's actually a creator, one who has brought this universe into existence. What it does question, however, and we'll be honest about that, is it questions the nature of God. Why? Why does God let these things happen? Why does this creator, or why did this creator make the universe and make this world the way it is? Now, it's very interesting that when we look at ourselves as human beings, what we find is that there is not a need that we have. There is not a single need that we human beings have, except that we find that there is a means to satisfy that need. Think of any need that you have, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. Human beings have many needs. They're not only the need to breathe and to eat and to drink. We have many other needs. We have emotional needs as well. And we find that those needs have been met. In fact, often we find that not only have they been met, but they have been fulfilled generously, we could say. We don't survive only on one type of food. human beings have a huge variety of beautiful tasting foods on which we can survive. Not only do we survive on them, but they taste really good. And the same emotionally. So we find that whoever has created this amazing universe in which we live has made it extremely comfortable and pleasant in general for human beings. We find our physical needs are met, yet there are other needs that I am hinting at, and some of these needs, I believe, are more, arguably they are more important than even our physical needs. Of course, the secular society and secularism in general emphasizes very strongly the physical needs of human beings. You need a job, you need a car, you need a house, you need clothes, you need food. That's it. If you've got that, you should be happy. You know, this is really the emphasis of secular societies and secular politics. But there are other needs that human beings have, and they manifest themselves in many different ways. And one of those needs that we have is we want to know, why are we here? What is the purpose of our life? What is the reason for our existence? Why are we here? What are we supposed to do? This is a type of need also that human beings have. And it's compelling that when the evidence is in front of us that all of these different needs that we have, the physical needs that we have been obviously fulfilled by the Creator, then is it not also, could we not also have a right to expect? Would it not also be sensible to expect that this other need, this need to know what is our place, why are we here, what is the reason of our existence, that this has also not been met as well? And then, this is not, of course, my subject. Someone else is going to talk about that. But it brings us on to the issue where we have to understand that in order to know more about our Creator, there is a very limited type of knowledge that we can have about God through reason. And I've basically outlined it. There's not much more we can know about God through reason. We could sum it up. God exists. God is wise. God is powerful. God is infinite. God is self-sufficient. God is bountiful. And there may be some other things that we could, understand through reason, but that's about it. And God is one. Anything else we want to know about God, reason is not going to help us much, if at all. In fact, if we start applying our reason, it might even confuse us. In fact, in order to know more about God, we're going to have to depend upon some other source of information than our minds. We are going to hope that some form of information has come to us and has been revealed to us through God and by God. Now, that's really as far as I want to go in the first part and the major part of our discussion here. But only I want you to leave you with one thought about this thing. For me, one of the most compelling evidences that the Quran is from God, that Islam is from God, that the religion of Islam is from that Creator. One of the most compelling reasons for me to believe that is that what it teaches about God is so much in accordance with what I have outlined just now. And that not only is it in accordance with it, it is not compromised in some incomprehensible way. For example, by saying God became a man. That compromises the belief in the oneness of God in a way that is unacceptable to reason. Because by definition and by what we have just gone through, how do we know that there is a God? How do we know the nature of God? That God is self-sufficient and eternal and infinite. Then what does it mean? What does it mean to say that a self-sufficient eternal being became a temporary, needy, mortal one? So something is eternal and temporary, both at the same time. Something is self-sufficient and needy, both at the same time. Something is outside of space and time and confined by space and time, both at the same time. It's not a paradox, it's something that is impossible by definition. There's no way that we could prove or establish such a doctrine, ever. So, any religion that teaches that, it seems to me, is a sign that there's something wrong with that. Also, religions that have a doctrine that the universe is God, that God is the universe and the universe is God and God and the universe are one and the same, is an equally incomprehensible doctrine. That's one of the most powerful things that I came across when I studied the Quran, when I read about Islam, is this beautiful, simple, rational doctrine it teaches about God. That is so completely in accordance with what a human being actually could really just about, I would say, any human being anywhere who sat down and thought about it enough could understand that. This is a very compelling reason for me to believe that Islam is from the Creator. There is one more thing I want to mention as well before I hand it over to you to ask any questions. I don't think that reason alone is the only way that we could necessarily achieve knowledge. This is probably a lot more controversial, of course. But in Islam, certainly, we believe that there is another source of information and knowledge. And this is what we call the fitrah, which is the natural disposition. Now this, of course, is really, this is from a point of, that I already believe in Islam, and I already believe what it teaches, and I already believe what God says in the Quran. So, it's not something that I can, it's not something that I can convince you of its veracity, or I can convince myself of its truthfulness outside the context of my faith. I believe this, but I do see evidence for it, and I can bring evidence for it, but I would never have known about it, probably, I don't think, except that I had studied it in the teachings of Islam. But the other source of knowledge and information that we Muslims believe the human beings can know about God is called the fitrah. This is the natural disposition. We believe that God has created every single human being upon a nature. This nature inclines the human being inherently to know God and to worship God. And so this is what we believe is the inherent nature of human beings. Human beings are pre-wired, pre-programmed to recognize God's existence. It's not necessarily an intellectual thing. It is an instinctive. It's something that is instinctive. It's in our instincts. Now, there are some things to illustrate in human behavior that is the case. And the example that the Quran brings forward is the conditions when human beings find themselves in conditions of extreme distress. Now the Quran gives a specific example of a group of people who go on a boat, they go on a ship, and they're going on a voyage for trade. And as they get into the boat and they head out into the sea, there is a storm. It's not just any old storm, it's like a serious storm. Okay? What was that film? Was that? It's George Clooney. I'm still bits of it. Like massive storm. And the Quran is describing this storm. The waves are coming over like the roof of a tent. So you can imagine. The waves are coming over the people like the roof of a tent. So these people, in this condition, they have abandoned their faith in technology because they don't think anymore the boat's going to save them. They've given up their idea that the boat is going to sink. So forget the boat, forget science, forget technology. That is not going to save me. The captain, he's already jumped, he's already gone, right? So the captain ain't going to get me out of this, right? My money, I can't buy my way out of this one. And I can, call on mummy, but she's like 1,000 miles away right now, okay? So Meaning all the things that human beings put their faith in, put their trust in, put their hope in, all the things in a sense which they worship and they believe have some power over their lives, they give these things up. They give it up. And what do? It's not a rational reaction. It's not like, oh, I've thought about all of these things and this and that. No, the reaction is rather like when you pick up something hot, you don't think about dropping it, you drop it instinctively. Their reaction at this time is to call upon God. Now, they may not know the name God, or they may have some name for God. Doesn't matter what the name is. What is important is the concept that is in their mind. What they are calling to is a being that they know has the power to rescue them from their predicament. And that being is not a being inside the creation. They're not calling upon a star, a moon, a galaxy, a created thing. They are calling upon some being that they know has power over them and this universe. It is instinctive, deep inside the human being. Sometimes that's the only time it comes out, at that moment of despair. Oh God, help me. Calling to that being. This is another type of proof, another type of evidence of the existence of God. It's not an intellectual one. It's not a reasoned one. But it's one that many human beings, if not all of them, have or will experience sometime in their life. And one of the very fundamental messages that Islam is getting across is that why? Why is it that if you acknowledge that fact at your moment of despair and your moment of helplessness, that everything in this universe ultimately has no real power to benefit you? When push comes to shove, all of them don't really have that capability. Then you realize that there is one being that has power over everything. So then why do you worship something and someone else other than God? Why do you worship something or someone else other than that being? This is the very essence of what Islam is teaching. And this is the very essence of our introduction today, what Islam is really all about. Not only whether God exists, whether there is a creator, but what does that really mean for us as human beings? It's not my task to go into that much further. That's going to be covered by some other lectures. So in fact, you're going to have to turn up to those ones, to get some more. So I hope that that's, at least got us thinking a little bit about this very important issue. And thank you much. Thank you very much.
I'd like to say thank you to the speaker for his discussion.
Mate.
But anyway, before that, it's now for your chance to ask questions, because there's no point of having a talk without your input and your feedback and your comments, and whether you agree or disagree. And so, like with anything, question and answer session has its rules and regulations, and I'm going to tell you them right now. And that is number one. You must ask 4 questions. But that, on a more serious note, is that if everybody could try to ask ask one question only, just so that everybody has a chance to ask. So make it pretty good. But if there's no one asking any questions, then of course that same person can ask more than one. And more important than that is if you could raise your hand when you want to ask the question, and I'll just point to you like that, and then I'm trying to voice your question. So I guess we'll begin the question and answer session. If anyone would like to ask anything, please feel free. Yes.
Yeah.
I believe that I'm still on this very discussion. But I was just wondering that if the conclusion came that I didn't want to surrender myself or believe in what you believe, I was wondering according to what this unpleasant surprise would be.
Yeah. Just to go back to what you mentioned. I mean, in English anyway, I don't know about any other language, but we do have two different words for what you described. An atheist is actually someone whose, I would say, their faith is not to believe in God. They actually believe there is not a God. An atheist is someone who they believe there is not a God. An agnostic is someone who doesn't know whether there's a God or not. Yeah? It's two different things. But an atheist is actually someone who says, I believe there isn't a God. That's what an atheist is. As for, the second part of your question, the Quran is very clear about this matter. And one of the things that the Quran is very emphatic about is that the knowledge of the existence of God is not something hidden. It is in fact something obvious. It's in fact something so obvious that the Quran states, the English meaning of it, is there any doubt about the existence of Allah? Not only about God's existence, but about the oneness of God. It is something that is so compelling, so obvious, so manifest, that it's almost beyond reason that a person could doubt such a thing. And the consequences of rejecting that knowledge and that thing are very severe. In fact, an essential part of what Islam teaches, and of course many other religions as well, is that this life is not the only life. That there is another life for the human beings after this life, an eternal life. And that life begins with what is called Yawm al-Qiyamah, or the day of standing, a day of accounting where God is going to ask the human beings about everything that they have done. This sort of really goes beyond the scope of my lecture, of course, and it's I don't want to preempt whoever's going to be talking about the purpose of life, because that's one of the talks, isn't it? Is it? Let me get it wrong. Okay. Okay, the call of the prophets and Islam, the word of God. Well, okay, it's not there, so let me go. So, I'm confusing myself with next week. Really, life has a purpose. God has created us for a purpose. Our minds, our intelligence, this natural disposition that God has created us with is there for a purpose, and a very, very important purpose. And if human beings have failed to accomplish that purpose, they are going to be judged and they are going to be dealt with accordingly. So part of the knowledge that has come from God is that this life is not the only life, and that there is a life to come, a day of judgment, a day when God is going to ask us about all the things that we have done, and that for those people who have failed to fulfill their created purpose, then they will be punished in a place that is called, in Arabic, Jahannam, or it's got many names actually, but it is a place of terrible torment, a fire actually, that is a place of terrible torment and terrible suffering. So the consequences of failing to realize the truth about God is extremely severe, extremely severe. And not only, in fact, in the next life, in this life as well. Because the Quran teaches us that the true path to human happiness in this life is by fulfilling our created purpose, by submitting ourselves to God. That's what we, in fact, have been created to do. We've been created to do that. The very least we could say that if a human being does something else with their life, they've wasted their life. But in fact, it's not only that they've wasted their life, they've done something more severe than that. So that true Islam and a true Muslim is a person who is truly at peace. Peace does not mean, by the way, in Islam, the mere absence of war. People limit this idea of peace meaning no fighting. No. Peace truly means an inward peace. That comes from recognizing the purpose of my life, the reason for my existence, and it doesn't stop there, and then fulfilling that, acting according to that. And only when a human being does that can they truly be happy, can they truly be at peace. So the consequences of failing in this life is also misery and despair.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
I don't really understand why there is so much like instilled fear in trying to understand an all-merciful God. I mean, I
Okay.
recollect
That's a real problem I have with that. An all-merciful God. Where did you get that from?
in the prayer at the beginning, when we tried to
Yeah.
we did the translation of the merciful God.
Yeah, that's the difference. There's a big difference between all-merciful and merciful. There's a big difference. And this is one of the biggest problems I have when I've read any book on philosophy that tries to, how can I say, question the existence of God. It makes presumptions about God. And what they always do is say, well, how could an all-merciful, all-loving God allow this to happen? And it's like I'm saying, who said God was all-merciful and all-loving? Now, there are some people who say that, but that's not what the Quran says. The Quran does not teach us that Allah is all-merciful and all-loving. The Bible does say God is love. That is extremely problematic. That's one of the reasons. It's extremely problematic to say God is love. Then you have a great problem explaining evil in the world if God is love. But God is loving. God is merciful. But it doesn't mean God is all merciful and all loving. That is something that we don't agree with. Yeah.
Okay, I could go on about that one.
Yeah, but so can I just finish? So there is another side to it. God is merciful and God is loving, but He's also the severe in punishment. He's loving and He's severe in punishment. He loves the believers and the people who do righteous, yet He punishes those who transgress His limits. So it's not only an all-loving, all-merciful God. And that's why we Muslims, we don't have any problem with the concept of evil. We don't have any problem with the concept of human beings suffering, because the suffering of human beings is there as a consequence of our actions. It is a just consequence of the evil that we have done. That's why when I began my speech, as the Prophet Muhammad used to begin, he used to say that I seek refuge with Allah from the evil of ourselves and from the evil consequence of our evil actions. Because evil has evil consequences.
So, the consequences, for example, that you're talking about, that if they go on in the world, say, for example, tsunami and people are dying, that is because they deserve it.
No, it is a consequence of the sins of humanity. All evil that happens to us, every bad that happens to us, is a consequence of our evil actions. Well, it's got something to do with God. Of course it is, because God is the one who punishes those people who do evil. And that's a manifestation of God's punishment. If a person is being punished, they deserve to be punished. God doesn't punish someone who doesn't deserve it. No, it doesn't. Because God has made it upon us that we have to deal with what is within our capability. We have to obey God's commands. The ultimate good is to obey the commands of God. God has ordered us to obey Him. That is what we have to do. In fact, to an extent, we have a limited type of capability. We do the best we can. We have good intentions, and we do the best we can to implement those according to the law of God. Actually, the results of it ultimately are with God. But that's what has been demanded of us. That's what is expected of us. That's what good by definition means, doing acts of obedience to God. So of course we have to do our best within the framework and within the capabilities that God has given us to change evil and to encourage God, to encourage good. So yes, that's something that has been made obligatory upon us.
One moment.
And so can I say? And sometimes God may punish some people at the hands of some other people. God may punish some people at the hands of some others. So yeah. That is true. But I wasn't, maybe she's going to say it now.
Okay,
Yeah.
there's a question at the back there. I'll come to you after some other questions.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yes. Actually, I answered her words back to her very specifically on purpose. She said, everyone who is being punished is because they have done something bad, and I repeated, yes, everybody who is being punished is being punished. I mean, it's obvious, but I had to say that, right? Because something bad may happen to me, okay? But I don't necessarily view it as a punishment. You may think, oh, look at that bad thing happening to that person. But I may not view it as a punishment. I may view it as a test. In fact, there are people who have reached certain spiritual levels that when they are subjected to tests and trials, they take a type of satisfaction out of that. Because it is something that they know can bring them closer to God if they are patient with it. If they continue to be thankful and grateful to God. In fact, this is why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the people that God tests the most are the prophets, and then the ones most like them, and then the ones most like them. So things that happen in the world that we call them evil, but actually many of those things, they're not evil in an absolute sense. In fact, they could have many good consequences as well. They could have many good consequences as well. As there is much harm that has happened to people from the tsunami, for example, there is a huge amount of good that has happened from it as well. But the question is, the point is this, is that the same thing can have a completely different effect on two different people. This building could collapse on us right now. For someone, it is a terrible punishment. Yes? Because that's how they react to it. And that's a consequence of their actions. But for another person, it may be a means for them to even become closer to God. Maybe that person will do some heroic deed. Maybe that person will help others. There are many things through which and by which that person could improve themselves in so many ways. Okay? So, for one person, it wasn't a punishment at all. For another person, that's exactly what it was. A punishment. And who was it a punishment for? The evil people. And that's why I said one of the consequences of disbelief in Allah is a punishment in this life. Not only in the next life. It is a punishment in this life. Now, as I said, anxiety, depression, and despair, and so on and so forth. This all comes from a lack of realization of why this is happening. What is it all about? How should I react to it? A true believer in God knows how to react to all of those things. And in fact, increases them in happiness and love and goodness and true peace and tranquility. So the same thing can have a completely different results. Same thing, but two different results from different people.
Okay, before I come back to the question, is there anyone else that wants to ask any questions? Please feel free. I'm surprised that no one else wants to ask anything.
You can ask the sister, let the sister ask the question here. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. 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 The point I was trying to make is that the existence of these things actually does not really tell us about whether there is actually a creator or not. It only begs the question, why does the creator let these things happen? Now that is one of those things that we can only know through revelation from God. We can only know why God lets these things happen if God tells us why. Yes? This is the reason. And, this goes on to the question, well, did God send us a revelation? If God did send us some guidance, how do we know that that guidance is from God? So those are the stages. I'm only laying down, so to speak, stage one. You're absolutely right. And so, in a sense, this discussion here about the nature of good and evil and why these things, and even to say an all-merciful God is, or a merciful God, is preempting. We're going ahead of ourselves. We haven't got that far yet. Okay? So it really means that we need to go to some source of guidance, some revelation. Now, some people could believe there is a God, but He doesn't bother with us. He doesn't care. He just left us. He created it, designed it all, and just, I don't think that's very likely, but, again, but as I said, that's a possible belief. However, there is, again, compelling evidence to believe that God has revealed knowledge for the benefit of human beings, knowledge about Himself, so that we could know more about God, His attributes, His qualities. And why is the world the way it is? So, it really comes back to the fundamental question. Did God reveal something to us? If God did, how do we know that that is from God? This is really the essential question. If we could establish the Quran is from God, or the Bible is from God, or, I don't know, what's his name, David Quraysh, or, he was really whatever, right? Or whoever, Sayyid Baba, okay? I mean, if we could establish that, and we have some solid evidence, then that's our explanation. And we can't really go beyond that. We can say, well, God says He created this for this reason, and He lets this happen for that reason, and that happens for this reason. That's the end of it. Take it or leave it. It's up to you. So, yeah.
I know that obviously you mentioned that we are allowed to question, and of course we can say absolutely certain. But if we are going to punish for not believing at the end of the day that God does exist, then isn't there, what's the point to begin with, considering what the conclusion that we have to come to is going to be felt?
Right. Well, the reason is that is one of the ways that God makes known truth from falsehood. In fact, this is the reality of one of the reasons why, or the reason why, God has created the world the way that He has. It's really, the problem is what we're doing is we're really going ahead of ourselves. We've only taken a little bit of the discussion, and you're asking me questions that are dealing with something that is a lot further on in the discussion. Okay? But if we really look at this world, if we look at the universe in which we live, it is a universe in a world of contrast. There is beauty, there is ugliness, there is health, there is sickness. Okay? There is life and there is death, there is light and there is darkness, there is good and there is evil. There are all of these things in this universe. The reality is that Allah has made the universe that way, so that one can be known against the other. In reality, we could never know what goodness is unless there was evil. We could never know what forgiveness was if we didn't commit sins and then ask God to forgive us, and then God would forgive us. If that process doesn't happen, how do we really know what forgiveness is? We don't know. We'd never truly, really understand. That is why there is this amazing saying of the Prophet Muhammad. He said that if you didn't commit sins and ask God to forgive you for your sins, God would remove you and He'd bring another people who did commit sins, and they would ask forgiveness for their sins, and Allah would forgive them. It's not an invitation to sin, but it is a very important, it's an important explanation. Really, it is so deep and so significant to understand this is why Allah has created us the way He has. Okay? And that is the way that we come to know about God. That is the way that we human beings come to know about God. What is God and what is not God is known through all of this. Yeah? Go on. I hope you're listening to me because, go on, yes. Go on, okay, go on.
Okay, I'll move on actually. There's something else you said about how our experience is kind of, you were relating human experience
Right.
to how we perceive what God is. Now, I don't, you were saying about how you think about theology examples and stuff,
Yep.
about the person
Right. Okay.
But then, I don't understand why you think that we would have the capability to necessarily understand anything of how the universe works. For example, you also use the kind of space and time, things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, still scientists, whatever,
Mm.
we don't understand is the human experience of what every day is.
Mm.
We couldn't make the relation, for example, what time is.
Yep.
So then why would you make that relation as to that is the key?
I absolutely agree with you. I've got nothing to say in response to that except that I usually, if I start this discussion, I usually start by making the premise from the very beginning. That my entire argument is based upon the premise that in general our human observation and our reasoned understandings of the universe in which we live is what allows us to make sense of ourselves and our life. That's my premise, right? I agree that it is possible that we could all be plugged in like in the Matrix, okay? We could all be plugged into a matrix. Maybe this is all a dream, okay? That's, of course, Descartes' Cartesian doubt. It is possible. I don't deny it's possible. But then I go back to another point that I made. Who actually lives their life like that? Who lives their life like that? And even if it was true, what is the benefit? So there is obviously always a possibility of some type of doubt. But, you have to be honest with yourself. How many people live their life based upon that type of understanding? I don't think they do. Okay? And it comes back to remote possibilities. What is the most likely? What is the most reasonable? What is the most possible? So I think these are the things upon which we base our everyday decisions in life, and we should use those same type of things again. Yeah.
Before I take the next question, I just wanted to make sure we've got quite a few shy people in the audience here. Seems that's the case. If anyone is pretty shy, we do take questions on pieces of paper. You can forward them down if you like, just to make that brief.
Can I make a suggestion as well, sister? If you really want to have a discussion, yeah, we could talk afterwards. If you like, if you really want to get into this and get deep in the discussion, we could talk about it afterwards.
Another question. Fantastic. Okay.
They might not.
The guy in the red cap. I mean blue cap.
Yeah. Yeah. If there was one, it was reading a translation of the Quran. Yes, that's what it was. 20 years ago. It took me 2 years between reading it, right, accepting it, and then actually, changing my life. That was the difficult thing. It wasn't difficult for me, anyway, to read the Quran and say, well, I believe this is from God, I believe Muhammad is the messenger of God. That was not difficult for me. The difficult thing for me was actually to, change my lifestyle. I was looking through all sorts of religions, and then I studied just about every religion. Buddhism, Hinduism, philosophy, psychosomatic yoga, magic mushrooms, whatever. I was the only things I didn't look into very deeply were like Confucianism and Taoism and stuff like that. But just about everything else, I sort of really sort of looked at it. So I just wanted to know what's the reason. Really, the question for me was, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? What's the reason for my existence? That was the question that was bugging me. I wanted to know the answer to that, if there was an answer. I mean, at one stage I was quite prepared to accept that there wasn't an answer, and that I might as well just get lots of money and enjoy myself, and maybe that's what life is all about. So funnily enough, that was the very thing that actually led me to pick up the Quran, but that's another story.
You're talking about how man has a natural innate desire to worship and work according to what you said.
Okay.
Just like an interesting point that I was reading about is that you're talking about man worshiping God, but in this society, how can you find people turning away from that and looking to things like money as a solution or as an alternative to looking towards God to provide their answer? Because I don't think man can feel, as you said, weak and dependent on other things, things like money and things like even ancient civilizations, people that were dependent on, say, living next to a volcano, they worked with the volcano. If the volcano could destroy them and the volcano built fertile soil for their crops and what have you, they worked away and stuff like that. So I'm these different things, how do they change our system?
Well, I mean, the point being that ultimately these things have no power of themselves. They themselves, what's the point in worshipping something that of itself has no power? You can worship the volcano, but the volcano can't do anything for you. It can't hear you. It can't benefit you. You can pray to it as much as you like and sacrifice thousands of Vestal virgins, but the volcano is going to blow up when it's going to blow up. Okay? That's the point. You can worship a piece of statue, a piece of wood, right? Okay? Could even cry milk maybe one day or something like that. Okay? But at the end of the day, it's not going to do anything for you because it's a piece of wood. Okay? So ultimately, maybe things like money perhaps and power are slightly more tangible. Okay? But here, the worship comes from exaggerating and giving it a higher status than what it actually has. Some things have no status and no ability whatsoever to benefit you. And worshipping them is of no benefit. Okay? Other things, they have some type of benefit, like money and power and, fame and whatever. They have a type of benefit. But the worship of these things comes from imagining that they can give you something, in fact, which they can't give you. In other words, you elevate them beyond the ability what they have. Yeah? This is like some people might do with a prophet. The messenger of God, of course, brings you some very useful information. But the person could elevate that prophet and make that prophet equal with God. So then you have taken that beyond its limit, and that's how you worshipped it.
What are the people that argue that, when you said that you're rational beings, these things are actually providing something for you. The money will actually provide.
Yeah, that's true. But you know what? I tell you, everybody really knows. I'm sure they all know. Money doesn't make you happy. If it did, then the happiest people in the world would be the people with the most money. Now, I know that maybe the Hollywood movies would like you to think that, but if you actually open the biographies of some of these people who are the richest people in the world, they are not very happy people at all. So, we are indoctrinated with this idea money and wealth equals happiness. But really, when you ask people, at the end of the day, is that really it? Is it really that money makes you happy? Deep down, not deep down inside, really, people know money does not make you happy. It's very limited what money can do for you, actually. Happiness is something else altogether in reality. So people really imagine it can do something that it can't really do. But to deny that thing altogether and to say I don't need money or I don't need, that's also not from our religion. That's a type of, an incorrect type of behavior. It's a type of, in fact, a mockery of the Sharia. That's one of the issues that, the sister was bringing. That in Islam we do take into account cause and effect. If we do this in general, the result is that. And that's how we have to behave in general in Islam.
Okay, person like that.
I don't want to talk about Sharia right now because that would be, I think that's another discussion.
Okay.
But I just want to ask about, I don't believe that everyone does get what they deserve. I think that's a great interpretation of what they deserve.
Right.
But I just wanted to ask you what you feel about God representing something who is ultimately the ultimate
Yep.
Otherwise, well, you can't really take the chance that God may not exist because otherwise it's not incarnate.
Yep.
And how that ties in with education or anything like that, because at the end of the day, it is a dictatorship.
Well, you know, Allahu Alam, it depends what you mean by dictatorship. But the fact that God gave us free will, and God gave us choice. You see, once someone said to me this, I was down in Speaker's Corner, right, and this guy said, God's a dictator! I said, you know what, you don't believe that. He said, what do you mean? I said, listen, this was when Saddam was still in power, right, okay? I said, try going down to Iraq and walk down the street saying, Saddam's a fat, such and such, he's a whatever. You go down the street and insult Saddam Hussein and see how long you'll live. Okay? See how long you'll live. I said, the fact that you stood there and you said God's a dictator proves that you don't believe God's a dictator. Because if he was, he wouldn't have let you stand there and say that for 3 seconds. No, but ultimately you face the consequences of your actions. But a dictator is not like God is kinder than the most loving mother, the most patient father. God is patient, he is forgiving, he overlooks people's faults. They do crime after crime, transgression after transgression. They abuse God and deny God and abuse God, even though it's so obvious. And for years they do that, and still God is patient with them, and still God relents. That's forgiving. That's not a dictator. That's a forgiving, compassionate, merciful, relenting being. To call such a one, no, but in the end, yes, you will face. After you have all these chances, after you have all these possibilities, then yes, you must face the consequences of your actions. But what we believe as Muslims is this: whoever goes to hell chooses to go to hell. Yes. Whoever goes to hell, they chose it. They chose it. They knew from their knowledge. Absolutely. This is the path that leads to, it's marked very clearly. This is the path to hell. There it is. This is the path to hell. There it is. You know, and the person chooses it. Why do they choose it? You know what? Because it's full of nice things. Temptations and ease and comfort. And so, I like the ease, I like the hell, I know it's going to hell, but I like this life. I want to enjoy myself. And the other one is this is the way to paradise. It's clear, it's obvious, but you know what? Looks a bit difficult. Looks a bit hard. But it's there, and you make your choice. That's it. That's the life. So whoever goes to hell is there because they chose to. A dictator doesn't do that. A dictator picks you up and puts you in a place you don't deserve. Saddam Hussein, why was he a dictator? Because if you said something he didn't like, okay, first of all, he was a nasty piece of work, and if you said something he didn't like, what does he do? He doesn't just kill you, he kills your family, your sister, your mother, your brother, the whole lot. That's a dictator. He doesn't forgive and overlook and give you time and, you know, and send someone and explain things to you and look at my policies and look, I'm doing it like this and make you understand and show you the statistics to show why this is going to work and this is the reason behind it. And then you say, no, why no? Well, because, you know, actually I just like living my life just the way I do and I just think you're a blah, blah, blah. No, how can you compare the two things?
So I'll come to you. There's another question.
Yeah. But, I mean, you know, I don't agree with that. I mean, what do you mean by, okay, if you mean by dictator that, you know, if you mean by dictator, I know that, you know, smoking cigarettes, injecting yourself with cocaine and heroin is bad for you, and I say, listen, don't smoke, don't inject heroin, and don't take cocaine. You're a dictator. Yes, if that's what you mean, I'm a dictator. Fine, if I tell my son, don't do this and don't do that, it's bad for you. If that's your definition of a dictator, okay, then God's a dictator, if that's what you want to make the definition. But I don't think that's what any of us mean by a dictator.
Okay, one more, wait, I will come to that, but there's another question I think Mara wants to ask a question.
That's in the Quran. Yes, that's the way the book you're reading. Yeah. Yeah.
But basically, everyone has said the message, and if you've seen the message and you accept the message and you know that you can repeat the message from your time, but having like someone completely innocent who's never come in contact with the phone and knows nothing about it, no details, or hasn't had the slightest sort of contact, and these kind of stuff. So realistically speaking, that's fine. But also another thing is, I firmly believe, because I was so curious 5 years ago, I completely didn't believe in it. And I was questioning myself night and day, is this nice? And I think when you come to the stage where you want to guide it, and you're not just there for argument's sake, and I'm not saying that you are just for argument's sake, but you're asking for guidance, and you keep the sake of you ask them for the guidance. It gets a very reflective about God, that's the people listening to it. Allah is what, you know what they're saying, you know what
I wish people wouldn't do this. No, he doesn't know.
But if you are genuinely asking for guidance, the guidance will come to you. Really discerning about it,
She goes on for another 10 minutes. Yeah.
the most compassionate and most loving to the people who want to know. And we want to do this, we also do that if you want to. And in terms
You need to educate the brothers and sisters how to behave in the lecture. It doesn't matter. Maybe you should ask the sister to.
Okay. Thank you for that. Is there any other questions? There's someone on the left there. Yes.
Right.
So can we have questions directed to the speaker? if there are other comments, it's fine. It's great. If we could push that after the event. So
I'm sure everyone thinks they've got an answer, mashallah, and that's fine. You could talk about it afterwards, maybe. But if everyone's going to sit and say, well, I think this and I think that, and my answer to this is this, alhamdulillah, will be a long night.
Any other questions before we closing soon? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm aware of some other arguments about God's existence, but none of them, personally, I don't find them very convincing. I mean, that one, I don't really think as Muslims, anyway, that's really acceptable. It's not like you're hedging your bets, It's like, Pascal, you probably study his life, you find he gambled a lot, maybe, I don't know, some of these philosophers, the stuff they got up to. But, I mean, it's like, well, the consequences of not believing in God is like so severe, so I might as well believe in God, right? Just in case, it's like the way it is. But that's not enough, is it? It's not Iman. It's not what Islam expects from you to hedge your bets and like believe in God because, if I don't. No, you have to believe in God because that's the truth, and it's the truth, and you understand it's the truth. Yeah. Yeah, Iman is a firm belief and a conviction and a knowledge, a certain knowledge. It's a certain and definite knowledge. Not only that Allah exists, but that the Quran is His word and that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is His messenger. If a person genuinely is not convinced, for some genuine reasons, it's possible, then Allah knows best about their situation. And the sister did mention that, that the people who know that it's the truth and they choose the path of misguidance. They're the people who are going to end in hell. But there are people who are confused. There are people who don't know. And you don't have to live in a jungle not to know about Islam. You know? I'm sure there's many people living here right in this society who have such bad ideas about Islam, they would never think. Actually, in all the years that I was looking through every single religion to try and find out things about God and about life, and I never looked at Islam. Never. I never thought of looking at Islam. Not for a second. Because Islam for me was terrorism and bombs and, terrible things. And I never thought that Islam might have some answers. So doubts and, could come from many, many different angles. Yeah.
Okay. We will be focusing next day on the Yes.
Yeah.
We talk to people from non-religious backgrounds as well. They say, God is like a mountain in a big forest where there are many classes
Yes.
to that big mountain.
Yes.
So any religion you take basically will take it to God.
Yes.
So obviously because
It's very nice. Lovely, isn't it? Beautiful. Sounds so nice. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. The answer, that's a very good point, and it's such a beautiful thing. And it sounds so great, It sounds so nice that you like it to be true. Just like, wouldn't it be so nice if someone had come and died for your sins? And you just had to believe that, and you'd be saved. I mean, if it was true, I'd really want to know about it. Okay? But the problem with it is this, I just want to know, how do we know it's true? It could be true. From just a rational, intellectual point of view, maybe it's the truth. But my question always would be, how do I know? Because if you're making a statement about God, yes, then I want that verified from God. I want to know that that's what God says. If you can follow any religion and get to God by any religion, show me where God says that and where God teaches that. Show me where that's where God says that that's the truth. Because then, otherwise, you're speaking about God without knowledge. You're just inventing things about God. Now, there's not a human being who would really like people to say that about them. Such and such brother, doesn't matter how you celebrate, or such and such person, not brother, such and such person, doesn't matter how you celebrate their birthday. You could send them a bomb, send them some cocaine, send them some whiskey, take them to the disco, it doesn't matter. Whatever you do, it's fine. Slander them, write a nasty piece about them in the newspaper and just say, and this is to commemorate such and such. No. None of us will accept that for ourselves. So why do we think we should accept such a thing about God? Okay? It's possible from an intellectual point of view, but many of these things come down to a simple question. Bring your proof. Prove it. If God is like this, or God is like that, or God is like this, bring your evidence. Bring your proof that that's what God says. And if you can do that, then you have something. If you can't, you're just talking. It's just words.
Okay, we've been through 40 minutes of Q&A so far, believe it or not. And what it is that those who do have, we do ask our speakers if you could, while we are munching on something, that those who do have further questions, that they could open or have some mini discussion amongst themselves with the speaker, if the speaker does allow that, hopefully. And that's it. With the event doesn't finish, of course, until your bellies are a little half full at least with what we've got to offer.
It better be good after all of this, man. Building it up so big.
But I do hope though that